Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be reviewing this new foundation here from Dior. It is called the Dior Forever 24-Hour Wear High Perfection Skin Caring Foundation. It's a mattifying foundation. If you guys have been watching my channel for a long time, you know that I am a huge fan of Dior foundations, and my love for Dior foundations actually started with this one right here. This is the Diorskin Forever foundation. It was one of the first products I ever tried from the Dior line. I think this is also one of the most expensive foundations I have ever purchased, and it was probably my first very expensive foundation that I bought, and it has never steered me wrong. My only complaint with this foundation, now that I've been wearing it for a few years, is that it does oxidize. So you do have to go either a shade lighter or make sure you really bring it down your neck so that you don't have any demarcation lines. But I fell in love with Dior because of this particular foundation. Shortly after this one came out, meaning like a year, maybe 2 years later, this one here came out. So this is the Dior Forever Undercover 24-Hour Full Coverage Foundation. And as soon as this one came out, I became obsessed with this one. I have been loving this particular foundation just because it looks so good on my skin. It stays put throughout the day and it gives me a really great coverage. So I have been a fan of this foundation. Well, after these two have made their way into the market, Dior decided to release another foundation, and it's the Dior Backstage foundation. Now, this one here is, I think, within the last year. I think that's how long it's been on the market for, but it has been a go-to of mine. I did travel with this foundation to Europe. It is what I wore exclusively throughout my trip, and it never steered me wrong. Gave me really great coverage. It didn't feel like I had anything on my skin, and what I like about it is if I have any blemishes on my shoulders or my back, I can easily use this foundation on my body as well. It is transferable like that, which I really appreciate. Plus, this is one of the most inexpensive Dior foundations, which is a little bit weird to say, but it is the cheapest out of these two and this new one that they've basically come out with. There is another Dior foundation which I do have. I think it's in my makeup drawer over there. It's the Dior Air Flash. Now, I bought this about 2 years ago. Hopefully it hasn't expired yet, but I haven't tried it. So I have to get over to that foundation, try it out, and see how it fares on my skin. But overall, I've really been enjoying Dior foundation. So of course, when this one launched on Sephora's website, I had to click buy. I put it in my cart, it shipped to my house, and I have been testing it out ever since. Dior did come out with two different foundations. So the first is a Radiance foundation, which is meant to give you a more dewy, luminous complexion. And because I am on the oily side, I decided to forego that one and just stick with the matte version. That's the one I ended up buying, and that's the one that I have been testing. I do want to just talk about this packaging really briefly. As you guys know, with most of the Dior foundations, they do come in frosted glass bottles, and this one is no exception. It does come in a beautiful bottle. It contains 1 fluid ounce or 30 milliliters, and it is made in France. And of course, is got a pump. The packaging is almost identical to the Diorskin Forever foundation, except this bottle is just a little more rectangular on the front, while this one here looks more square. When you compare it to the Dior Forever Undercover foundation, this one here is a plastic squeezy tube bottle, so it is slightly different, but this one does contain 1.3 ounces or 40 milliliters of product. So it does have a little bit more plastic bottle. I guess it travels a little bit better, but I feel like when I'm paying so much money for a foundation, I do want luxurious packaging, so that's why I do have an appreciation for a heavy sort of glass bottle. And then finally, if you're comparing it to the Dior Backstage foundation, it is extremely different. The Dior Backstage foundation is a plastic bottle. It is round in shape, and and it is a squeezy tube as well, so a little bit different. And of course, out of all of the Dior foundations, this one happens to contain the most amount of product, and if I can read this correctly, it's got 50 milliliters of product, or what is it, 1.6 fluid ounces, so significantly more than this one and these two. I don't typically do this in my foundation reviews, but I thought it might be helpful in this particular one because it is just one single brand to kind of compare the different shades out of all of these Dior foundations. For reference, I do have a lighter skin tone and I do have what I think to be neutral undertone. So I always look for a light and neutral foundation. Sometimes I can get away with a light warm foundation, but it generally depends on the actual foundation and how I can make it work on my skin. But generally, that's what I'm working with. So for the new Dior foundation, I picked mine up in the shade 2N or 020, and I think it is a pretty good match across all of these particular foundations. So with the Dior Forever, I am a 020, so basically the same shade. Same goes for this one here, the Dior Undercover, I'm in 020. And then for the Backstage foundation, I am 1.5N. I could also go with a 2N in this particular foundation, but I have just been picking up 1.5 and it's worked quite well. I also wanted to compare the new Dior foundation to some of the other ones that I have on hand. So I did pull out my CoverGirl True Blend Matte Made Foundation, which is in the shade L40. And as you can see, it is quite similar in tone to the new Dior foundation, except it's just a little bit lighter. I've also got my YSL All Hours foundation in the shade B40, which as you can see is quite a bit darker. I think B30 would actually be a really good match, which is the other shade that I wear in YSL. And then I also have the L'Oreal Infallible Fresh Wear Foundation in the shade 430 Ivory Buff, and that seems to be a pretty good match to the new Dior foundation. In terms of the texture of the actual formula, so this one here is a little bit thicker and creamier, very similar to these two foundations. It's probably on par mostly with this one here, but this one comes a close second. This foundation is very, very watery, very, very thin in consistency, so it does not share a similar texture to the new foundation at all. So if we're comparing just the textures and the way the formula feels on my fingers, these two are almost identical. So for the last month or a little bit less than a month, I have been testing out the matte new Dior foundation, which I have to say I've really been enjoying. It is such a great foundation, but I felt like there was a small learning curve to it. At first, I started to apply this like I do with most of my foundation. So I put on a generous amount on the back of my hand, I grab my beauty blender, and then I just kind of go to town and I slather it all over my face. And I found when I did that, this foundation, it did get a little bit cakey. It also shifted around a little bit too much on me, which I didn't really like, and at the end of the day my skin just looked a little bit messy. So at the end of the day I realized that was not the best way to apply this foundation, and so I decided to use a less is more approach, which might be a little bit weird to some people, but I think with this particular foundation it does ring true. So I usually pump about 3 pumps on the back of my hand, and very gently I will dip in with my beauty blender and I will begin applying the foundation all over my face. I try to start with my cheeks for the most part, and you guys probably see this in all of the videos I've done where you see me apply foundation. It is my most troublesome area, so I try to get the bulk of the product on my cheeks, and then I move inwards towards my nose because I do have a lot of redness in this area here. So I try to make sure I cover up my nose, then I go down to my chin, and the last thing I typically do is my forehead as well as my upper lip, which don't usually require a lot of effort because my forehead is quite smooth. I don't have a lot of redness up there or any texture, so they're pretty easy areas to work with. Using that process made this foundation look so much better on my skin. I love this even more. So less is more with this foundation, people. Trust me on this one. This is the foundation that I have on my skin today, and as you guys can see, it has done an incredible job of covering everything up. I have no redness in sight. Everything looks nice and smooth. It hasn't exaggerated any of my texture, and my pores actually look decent. Aside from the less is more principle with this foundation, the other thing I realized is that you do need to set it. There is no way, at least for somebody like myself who does have oily and sometimes dehydrated skin, can get away with. I have to set this down with a powder, otherwise it's gonna get really messy really quickly. So there were a few days where I did wear this just on its own to see how it would wear. Of course, my concealer is the only thing that I would set underneath my eyes, and poof, I was out the door. Doing that was probably not a great idea because I did look awful throughout the day. I find myself having to touch up a lot more than I normally do, which just irritated me and it made me not like this foundation. But I also knew I wasn't giving it a fair go because I typically set my foundation down with a powder. I do want to talk about best methods for application. So when using this particular foundation, I liked applying it with a beauty blender the best. I think this is the way to make this foundation look amazing on your skin. I did use a brush to apply it. I used my Artiste brush. I did use this one, and I finally cleaned this palm brush and used it as well. This one applied my foundation so quickly, but while the brushes were good, I didn't find they were as good as a beauty blender. This could just be personal preference, but I felt like the foundation looked more like skin when I used the beauty blender, and when I used the brushes, I felt like it caked on a little bit more and it tended to settle in my fine lines a little bit more as well. So that was the only downside, but the preference is entirely yours. For me, beauty blender or sponge all the way. When it comes to powders, you guys know I am loyal to my MAC Studio Fix powder. This is hands down one of my favorite powders to set my foundation. It is what I use almost every single day of my life. If I'm not using this particular powder, you can definitely find me using this CoverGirl, what is it called? The Vitalist Healthy Powder. I think this is actually a really good dupe for the MAC Studio Fix powder. As you can see, I've hit pan. I really like that this powder does give you a little bit of extra coverage when you put it on, very similar to the MAC powder. It also has really good long-lasting properties to it. So I find anytime I use these two powders with this particular foundation, so no loose powder, just these ones, I found the foundation wore a lot better. It also kept me matte for a heck of a lot longer than me just wearing the foundation on its own. Having seen what the foundation looked like with just these two powders, I then decided to dabble into the loose powders, which is what I typically like to use when I need a bulletproof makeup. And I tried a lot of different powders. First of all, I went in with the Patrick Star and MAC collaboration loose powder, so Patrick's powder, and this one was just I was really surprised because this typically works well with almost every other foundation that I have, but with this particular one, I didn't think it worked as well. So I kind of put this one aside and I moved to another powder that I typically have really great luck with. It's from Cinema Secrets. This is the Ultra Lucent Setting Powder in the shade Beige. So this loose powder I used to set down my face, and the foundation did wear a little bit better, although I did see a little bit of transferring, smearing, and some of the foundation did rub off by the end of the day, but this powder did work a lot better than the MAC powder. Having used some of the, I guess, higher end powders, I then decided to try out some of my favorite drugstore powders. So of course I turned to the Coty Airspun powder. So this one here is in translucent extra coverage because, you know, your girl likes a little bit of extra coverage. So I would use this particular setting powder, and this worked really well with this foundation. I found it sealed my pores really nicely, and it did keep my makeup probably bulletproof the longest out of all 3 of these particular powders. So this one here worked really well, but as with all of my loose powders, I do go over it with another pressed powder like my MAC Studio Fix or my CoverGirl Healthy Vitalist powder. After the Coty Airspun powder, I decided to try my good old faithful Rimmel Stay Matte powder. And I don't know why I didn't just use this exclusively during this foundation testing initially, because this is the powder that ended up working the best with this foundation. It has made my makeup look so flawless. My skin looks like natural skin. It looks like I'm airbrushed when I'm walking around. I just feel so good about myself, and every other product just goes on beautifully on top of this particular powder. So I realized that this was the magic combination, using this foundation, this loose setting powder, and then my MAC Studio Fix powder on top, or the CoverGirl powder on top. So those were the combinations that I knew I needed to use when I was going to begin my comparison testing. When it comes to wear time, for this particular foundation, I do usually get between 6 to 8 hours of decent wear time. Anything beyond that, this foundation I find starts to fade and it ceases to exist on my face. As you guys know, my skin is on the oily side, and I do have a habit of touching my face throughout the day as well, so that could contribute to the foundation fading or not staying in place. But typically my foundations do have longer longevity. Like, out of all of the Dior foundations, this one here is probably the best one for longevity. While these two older ones stack up quite well, I find the longest wear time I can get is with this particular foundation, with no fading, no creasing, and no transferring. So that's kind of how I'm rolling the dice here. But again, it also depends on your skin type as well as how you set your foundation down. For the first 3 to 4 hours, this foundation looks phenomenal on your skin. It is going to give you this flawless, filtered look. You are going to love your foundation, love the way your skin looks, and products generally blend beautifully on top of it. However, for me, after the 4-hour mark, I did start to get greasy. So a lot of my natural oils were starting to peek through, and it wasn't looking cute anymore. I did have to go in with a beauty blender, basically pat everything down and readjust the foundation, powder it down once more. But once I did that, the foundation was back on and it was game on once again. As you know, with trying new foundations, you could end up with some breakouts depending on what the formula is. Luckily, I didn't experience any of that with this particular foundation. So for me, it ended up working great. And now we have reached the point where I am going to be inserting a bunch of different clips so you guys can see how this foundation wore on its own, as well as how it compared to all of these foundations. Let's do this. As you guys can see here, the foundation is looking pretty good. It's sitting well on my skin. It hasn't really transferred too much around my nose. Cheek areas are looking good. Basically, the foundation wore really well, and I did have this on for about 7 hours. I'm going to be battling out these two foundations today to see which one I actually prefer. So this is the new foundation from Dior. This is the Forever Perfect foundation. So let's get to work. I have primed and prepped my skin already. So I did use, let me show you, the Drunk Elephant Polypeptide Moisturizer. And for primer, here we go. I did use my Tatcha primer. So that is what I have on my skin. That is what I have consistently used throughout all of these foundation trials, just so I can get a better feel for the foundation itself. I am going to start off by applying the new foundation to this side of my face, and I'm going to be using my preferred method of application, which is my beauty blender. So I've got 2 pumps of the foundation right there on the back of my hand, like I would typically do. Clean beauty blender, and I'm just gonna start patting this onto my skin. Now on this side of my face, I'm going to be using the Diorskin Forever Perfect foundation. I'm going to be using the same beauty blender because I just have this one here and I don't really feel like washing it at the moment. I don't think there's really going to be cross-contamination or cross-pollination. It'll be fine. I think most of us anyways, when we apply foundation, don't really wash our beauty blender in between each application, so it's all good. I'm gonna give this foundation a good shake, and I'm gonna pump out just a little bit, similar to what I did with the previous foundation. And again, beauty blender in, and cheers. Now that my foundation is on, I'm going to be applying my concealer and powders, and then just a little bit of eye makeup, and that's going to be it for the day. For concealer and powder, I realized very quickly that the best ones to work with this particular foundation are from Huda Beauty. So this is the Overachiever Concealer, my MAC Studio Fix Powder, as well as my Loose Rimmel Stay Matte Powder. So these are the options that I am choosing to use today, and again, these have been pretty consistent throughout the foundation trials. Alright guys, here is the finished look. This is what my makeup is going to look like for the rest of the day. I feel like all of the powders went on beautifully on top of this foundation. I had zero issues blending anything out. Even the concealer seems to be sitting pretty well, although I am noticing a couple of dry patches just around the inner corner of my eye. But let me zoom you in so you guys can see a little bit closer what my skin is looking like now that all of the powders are on. So we're coming in real close here. There is the forehead. Everything is sitting really well at the moment. So remember, this is the side with the new foundation, and this is the one with the Forever Perfect foundation. So everything seems to be going quite well so far. On my nose, everything is looking really, really good on the old side as well as on the new side. But as you guys know, I do wear glasses, so this is the area that does tend to get affected by foundation for the most part. And then on the old side, we've got my cheek. Focus please. Which is looking pretty good at the moment. Same goes for my chin as well as my upper lip area. And on the new foundation side, we've got something similar going on. So again, everything is sitting nice and smoothly, and as you can see, the foundation has settled nicely into my skin. It's not sitting on top, which is something that I really appreciate about this particular foundation. I am always a fan of a foundation that will just melt into my skin and make me look like I'm natural. Like I don't have anything caked on my face. And so far, both of these foundations are doing exactly that. I'm gonna check in at the end of the night so you guys can see how everything has worn. So I will see you guys a little bit later on. All right, guys, this is the first and only check-in of the day between the original Dior foundation and the new matte Dior foundation. I have had this on my face now for a solid 10 hours. Good Lord, that is more than I care to have makeup on my face for. Now my eyes are a little bit on the messy side, a lipstick is a little bit faded. Hopefully the lighting is okay. I've actually taken away my studio lights, and of course it's nighttime, so I don't have daylight to rely on at the moment. So I'm just being lit up by lamps essentially, and my overhead room light. So I am going to zoom you guys in, and do bear in mind that I have touched up and I have blotted throughout the day. I couldn't wait any longer to do it because my face had gotten so oily, and my eye makeup in particular was just making a huge mess around my eyes. So I had to go in there and clean things up, and I figured while I'm at it, I'm just gonna go ahead and do my blotting and whatnot. So let me zoom you in. So as you can see on my forehead, so this is the side with the new foundation and this is the side with the old foundation. Forehead is looking okay, although I do see the foundation kind of settling on both sides. It's kind of just sitting on top of my skin at the moment. I'm probably going to attribute some of the dry patches that are being accentuated on my skin to the actual weather, because it is mind-numbingly cold outside at the moment. As for the nose area on the original Dior side, it is looking okay, although it has faded quite a bit around my nose over here, and that's because I have been blowing my nose quite a bit. So that is not the way the foundation is wearing, it's me having to blow my nose. But I do remember around here there was a lot of shifting. It was not looking good. At one point all of my makeup had sort of caked into the inner corner of my eye, which was really gross. That's never happened before. Anyhow, on the new side, things are looking just about the same. Everything is kind of uniform on my nose. No big deal right now after I basically fixed everything up. It's still looking good, but I had the exact same thing that happened on this side happen on this side. If we're comparing my cheek right now, the cheek on the old side is looking pretty good. Again, no complaints. And same goes for the side with the new foundation on it. I think it's looking, oh, pardon me, pretty good. I did notice a little bit of transferring down here, which is where I typically touch my face. So again, that's more of a me thing than I think a foundation thing, but there was the transferring that happened. Otherwise, I think it's sitting okay. Overall, I think the foundations have both worn quite well throughout the day, except for whatever happened on my nose. That did not look good. I really do wish I had pulled out my camera and actually shown you guys what was going on, but it was just so awful. Everything had just kind of shifted up and gathered right in here. It was really bad. Aside from that, I feel like the foundation has worn really well on both sides. I definitely feel like there's makeup on my face, and my oils did come through relatively quickly, so I didn't end up staying matte for very long. I think by hour 5 all of my oils were peeking through, and I believe that is the point where I ended up getting a lot of transferring and shifting of the foundation. foundation. For me, the hard part is determining which foundation I would prefer, the old Forever Perfect foundation or the new matte foundation. And to be honest with you, I didn't see a huge difference between the two. I think both of them are equally good. Maybe this new matte formulation is just an updated version of the older one, but I didn't notice any significant improvements. The only thing that would sort of push me to say that the new foundation is better is that it did not oxidize. At least on my skin, it has not. I did bring the foundation down my neck quite a bit on both sides, especially this side, because I know this foundation does tend to oxidize quite a bit. And this side did not do it, whereas this side did do it. So I think on that technicality, I would have to pick the new Dior foundation over the old one. And that concludes the wear test between the old Dior Forever Perfect foundation and the new Dior matte foundation. I hope you enjoy the next wear test. Guys, I have gone ahead and applied the foundation to both sides of my face. On this side, as you saw, we have the new matte foundation from Dior, and on this side over here we have the classic Diorskin Forever Undercover 24-hour full coverage foundation. And immediately I noticed that there is a color difference. Oh my goodness. First and foremost, I'm looking at myself in the mirror and I know the left side of my face looks a lot lighter than the right side of my face does. It's actually quite funny. I really hope it's translating on camera. And again, I don't have my typical studio setup right now. I am sitting in front of my window. There's lots of natural light coming through, so this might actually be the optimal condition to really see this foundation at work. With the Undercover foundation, I am definitely seeing a lot more coverage, but I'm also seeing a lot more cakiness on this side. On this side over here, while I'm noticing there is coverage, there's not as much coverage as I would like there to be. And as you guys have probably read on Sephora's website or the Dior makeup website, this new foundation is only medium coverage. I wish it was a little more medium to buildable full. I did try to build it up a little bit around this area here and my cheek over here because I do have some breakouts at the moment and they are popping through. Unfortunately, even when I tried to build it up, I wasn't getting the coverage I wanted. The redness is still peeking through, so I'm just gonna have to rely on concealer to do a little bit of patchwork for me. I did notice that in terms of consistency, this one here is definitely a little bit thicker than this one is. This one here has a really nice and natural finish to it. It makes my skin look like skin, whereas this one here, you can really tell that there is foundation on my face. Now I'm gonna zoom you guys in a little bit closer so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. All right, the forehead is on deck first. As you can see, this side over here, it definitely looks like there's foundation, but it's really nice full coverage. This side over here, same thing, but again, my forehead is one of those areas on my face that doesn't really need that much work. It is quite smooth. As you look at my nose though, this is where you can really tell the difference. And I'm just gonna step back a little bit so you can see all of the redness peeking through over here. On the old Dior side, you can see there is definitely foundation on my skin, but it is doing an amazing job of coverage. And as I turn to the other side where the new foundation is, You can see that it looks nice on my skin, but the coverage is severely lacking over here. As you guys can see, my redness peeking through. My cheek over here is still looking good, chin is looking okay, but the area where I need it the most at the moment, it's unfortunately failing a little bit. I am now gonna go off camera to finish off the rest of my face. I'm gonna use a little bit of concealer and then some loose powder, pressed powder, put a little bit of extra makeup on, and then continue on with my day. So I will be right back so you guys can see what everything looks like when it's powdered down. Alright guys, I am slowly starting to fade with the sunlight, so I want to make sure to get on here so you guys can see my face, and hopefully you guys can tell all of the powders have gone on beautifully. I think all of the makeup is sitting really, really well. No complaints so far. I am starting to see just a little bit of extra creasing down here around my smile lines with the old Dior foundation versus the new one. Oh, and thank goodness the concealer did come to the rescue and it did fix all of the redness that was showing through with the new foundation. So we are all good there. I am going to be back towards the end of the night so you guys can see how this makeup has held up. Hey guys, final check-in of the night. I am battling foundations today. This is the Dior Forever Undercover foundation side, and this is the new Dior matte side, and I have thoughts. I have not touched up at all day. So what you're seeing is, I guess, a raw image of what my face looks like. I can't believe I'm about to put this on camera, but it looks like one side of the foundation did last a little bit better than the other side, which I wasn't surprised about given the way how the foundations actually applied earlier on. So let me zoom you in and I'll just let you see what's going on. We're gonna start off with my forehead. So hopefully you guys can see this. So this is the old Dior side, new Dior side. And as you can see, it's actually sitting quite well on my forehead. Again, one of the smoothest surfaces on my face. But what I am noticing on the old Dior side, and hopefully you see that, the foundation is transferring like a crazy. It's doing the same thing on the rest of my face. I mean, I just have a bunch of foundation on my finger, and if I try doing the same thing on the other side, while it happens, I feel like it's a little bit less noticeable on this side than it is on this side. Meaning, I think the foundation sticks to my face a little bit better on this side than it does on this particular side. If I take off my glasses so you guys can see the ratchetness that is my nose right now, it is just bad on both sides. It looks like it has shifted on both sides, unfortunately, so there wasn't really great staying power on my nose. If we examine my cheek area, I feel like it's just really heavy looking. Like there's a lot of foundation that is caked on it, which again may not be a bad thing. I mean, the coverage is fantastic on this side, but it definitely looks like I'm wearing makeup, which again, I may not mind, but when I compare it to the other side, I feel like this side definitely looks a lot more natural than this side does. You can also see how the foundation has settled into my fine lines around my mouth. Taking you over to the new Dior foundation side, hopefully you guys can see this. I feel like the foundation has lasted a little bit better and it looks a lot more natural on this particular side than it does on this side. The powders had blended on perfectly on both sides, so I had no issues with that, but I feel like in terms of longevity, the powders are sitting a lot better over here than they are here. On this side, it kind of looks a little bit muddy. Hopefully you guys can see like the crappy strip of bronzer right there, compared to this side where it still looks nice and blended and smooth. So that is the biggest difference that I am seeing at the moment with that particular side. It looks like, well, I mean, this is probably more the concealer than it is the actual foundation, but I don't have a lot of redness peeking through over here, which is where I had some breakouts that I was trying to cover up. But of course, my nose did not survive very well. If you were to ask me which foundation wears better, the new Dior foundation, I think definitely takes the crown. I did like the Undercover foundation just because of its coverage. I think it provided a lot more pigment in the foundation than this one did. So I guess the overall result of this particular foundation test is that the new Dior matte foundation is absolutely medium coverage, not buildable full, whereas the Undercover Dior foundation is definitely more full coverage, but it does look a lot more cakey on the skin. As you guys can see, my oils have started to peek through, and unfortunately I only got about 5 hours worth of wear where I was just completely matte and beautiful looking. After the 5-hour mark, again, my face just started to melt a little bit, which is quite typical for me with most foundations, but I do know there are some out there that perform a little bit better than others. I am quickly going to blot my face so you guys can see how things are going to look once everything is adjusted, and hopefully you guys can see how quickly this foundation can sort of reset itself. I will be zooming you in once more, and please don't mind me looking at my viewfinder. It's kind of the only mirror I have at the moment. Oh, my nose in particular, I can't wait to just fix up a little, you know? It was looking so bad. And then we're just going to basically tap over my entire face. I have not wet this beauty blender either. I'm just taking it dry across my face. As you guys can see, it is really easy to sort of reset this foundation and get it looking good again. You just need to touch it up a little bit. And that's it for this particular wear test. All right, final check-in of the day. We're going to zoom right in. As you can see, my oils have come through, but for the most part, the foundation is sitting quite well. So that was the Dior Backstage side. And on this side here, you've got the new Dior Matte Foundation. They're actually both wearing about the same, but as you can see around the bridge of my nose, there is some transferring and shifting. I'm just going to buff everything out really quickly with my beauty blender just so I can reset this foundation. You'll see in just a second how nice this foundation looks once everything is buffed out. It goes right back to normal. If you asked me which foundation reigns supreme out of this particular foundation trial, I'm going to have to say the Dior Backstage foundation, for the main reason that it doesn't feel like I'm wearing anything on my face. I think that's why I liked it a lot more. But in terms of coverage and wear time, they were both about the same. Out of all of the foundation trials that I have done comparing all of these Dior products against each other, I did not compare it to some of my other foundations like Physicians Formula or my CoverGirl True Blend foundation. That's probably going to be another video because this one is already quite long, so stay tuned for that one. But basically, out of all of the Dior foundations, I do enjoy this one quite a bit, but I might enjoy my Backstage foundation a little bit more. And I think that's because this is just a little bit lighter or waterier in texture. So it still gives me lots of pigmentation, it gives me full coverage, but it doesn't feel like I have anything on my skin. And while this one still does feel quite weightless, very comfortable on my skin, I still feel it at the end of the day, whereas I don't get that same feeling with the Backstage foundation. Would I recommend this one? Absolutely. I think it is a delightful foundation. Again, really good wear time, excellent coverage, but you do have to set it down with powder. There is no way you can wear this one on its own if you have a skin type like me, which is oily skin. The one thing I am going to say is a bit of a downside to this foundation, but not a deal breaker, is that it does settle into my smile lines in particular. So nowhere else does it really settle on my skin, but down here I do tend to see it settle in my fine lines. Again, I just blend it out with my fingers and I'm good to go again, or I'll just use my beauty blender to pounce over and it's fine. So again, not a deal breaker, but it is something that I have noticed with my foundation trial. Whew, so this was quite the video. I really hope you guys found this video helpful. If you did, please go ahead and give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any of my upcoming videos. You can also connect with me on all of my social media. I am on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Snapchat, and I'll make sure to link all of my details in the description box below. If you want to see more videos like this where I compare products against each other in extended wear tests, make sure you let me know in the comment section below, and also let me know what products you want me to compare. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you're having an amazing day no matter where you are in the world. Stay beautiful, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!